Okay, so here we go. This is the next one, right? And I'm guessing that this is the Hydra. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just gonna double check right now. So I'm opening this thing up, and it comes with a spare axle and a spare bearing, which is pretty cool. And inside is the yo-yo, and it's kind of wrapped up in plastic, and it's got a blue string there as well. Now, just by looking at this yo-yo, it's got a thin bearing inside, and if I was to guess, and judging by like the packaging and the whole visit us online and, you know, yo-yoing for all ages, I've got a feeling that this thing, just at the end there, it's like, you can read that in your own time, but it's basically like, you know, if you're a beginner, old school, pro, this is for you. I'm guessing that this yo-yo is set up for beginner or responsive style play. Interesting enough. So just like everything else, like the iYoyo Steel, it's got that dimple there, which means this thing is also going to be really, really super good for horizontal finger grinds. Just testing. Yep, that bearing is very heavily lubed, and that makes sense. The reason that it came with a spare bearing and a spare axle is because this thing is set up for responsive play. If I want to see how it plays for unresponsive play, I would, you know, chuck that in. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna do right now. Check this thing out for responsive style play. I stand corrected, this is not the Hydra, this is the iYoyo2. Okay. So iYoyo2, sorry, my mistake. So this is the iYoyo2 set up for responsive play before I put in the new axle and the new responsive bearing in. Unresponsive bearing in. So, this thing is interesting. It's dead smooth with this narrow bearing in, and as you can see here, it's basically responsive. You know, as an advanced kind of player, I don't really see the point, but I'm sure any beginner players who don't know how to bind yet would find this very convenient. What I would say is that it's responsive, but it's not super responsive. So if I was a complete beginner, I probably, you know, your throws wouldn't be hard enough to get this thing like back up to your hand. But that being said, if you're willing to fork out $50 on a yo-yo, you probably know something about them already. So yeah, with the setup with the responsive bearing, it's just as you'd expect, just a semi-responsive yo-yo that I feel as if with time would get more and more unresponsive, okay? But, you know, we're all kind of advanced yo-yoers here that like want to know how things play for tricks, so let's go ahead and see. So that's the axle there, and if I compare it to that one, yeah, the second axle is slightly longer. So let's go ahead and set this thing up for unresponsive style play, which is basically what we're all interested in. So just remove the bearing there, and it's about half the size. This one, the responsive bearing, is about half the size of a normal bearing. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put in the new bearing, which is concaved as well, so it's going full 100. It's just not a unresponsive bearing. Oh my god. Ugh. And set this thing up. Okay. So putting in the axle, putting in the bearing. Okay, so first things first, this bearing doesn't really spin that long, meaning that if I chuck this into the yo-yo, it probably will be unresponsive. It will probably be responsive, so I'm going to take this out and take a look at this bearing that they gave me. This is the second bearing. This one looks like it's been encased, so it's probably been better taken care of. Yeah. Okay, so this thing spins for a lot longer. Now we try the iYoyo2. So as you can see, this thing is now 110% unresponsive. Okay. This is very interesting. So play is very much like something in the entry-level metal kind of price range. So kind of think along that. So like kind of Shutter Horizon kind of vibes. More the Shutter, I feel. But this thing is super good at horizontal finger grinds. Look at that, that is crazy. Okay, I could probably sit here for another minute and it probably wouldn't die. That being said, every time I try and like bind it back up, I always seem to like mess it up. So, it takes a bit of time to get it, but once you do. Alright. Let me get this chair out of the way. So this yo-yo kind of reminds me of a Shutter crossed with, and this is a yo-yo that I haven't really talked about at all, but a positron actually. That old turning point that Marcus Coe used to use. It kind of reminds me as a cross between those two. I think that's just shape-wise, but it's very nimble. So this one, unlike the iYoyo Steel, this one's very nimble and very like fast on the string. Doesn't have the same kind of weight distribution, obviously, because it's a mono metal, so it's lighter by definition. But yeah, this thing seems like a really nice smooth throw that you want to take out. One other thing I'd like to mention, that even though the colorway looks kind of cool here, when it spins, I also really like how it spins as well. So, whoops. Yeah. In terms of like defining characteristics, this thing is dead smooth. In fact, this thing is actually smoother than the iYoyo Steel that I tried. Probably because monometals are easier to make, but this thing is dead smooth. And this was after I chucked in a new bearing and didn't really pay any attention to tuning it at all. So it's still very smooth, which means that iYoyo's quality control is absolutely on point. Other than that, this thing is just a very nice entry-level metal yo-yo that is relatively nimble, but very versatile. So I feel as if this yo-yo would be capable at basically anything you throw at it. Okay, whether that be like bind, grinds, horizontal kind of stuff. You name it. And as the signature thing goes, it's also got the iYoyo finger spin technology. One thing I've noticed about this finger spin technology, and it's just kind of now, when you get it, it's good, but if you don't quite land it in there, the yo-yo itself becomes quite difficult to control. But if you do, it's smooth as hell, right? If you don't, it's quite like hard to get there and you lose control pretty quickly. Like that, right? So that's not really ideal, but if you want to practice finger spins and you want to just get it to spin there, this is probably the yo-yo for you. So when it works, it's great, but without a sufficient level of skill, you can't actually quite get it into that tiny little dimple, as opposed to the Skyver, which is pretty easy to get in there.